Hey, everybody. Welcome back into the Chump Change Fantasy Football Podcast. This is your host, Randy, and I am happy to be back with you here doing a little bit of NFL draft preview coverage and all sorts of stuff like that. So honestly, for me, over these last couple of years, I've really started to actually get more into the NFL draft itself, recognizing as I get into this is a fantasy football podcast. It's really fun seeing the players that come in and how they come in and where they go and what that looks like and what the process is like for them. And it's really interesting too, because something that, I've learned getting more into the NFL draft and its coverage and doing a fair amount of like NFL mock drafts and things like that, it makes you appreciate and notice some of those guys who you see later. Like, it's neat having a connection of, oh yeah, I actually thought that he was going to go way sooner than he did. Or, oh yeah, I remember, like, they grabbed him like way earlier than anyone was expecting. Even for positions like an offensive tackle or this defensive end, some of these things that like maybe in fantasy football, you're really not as concerned about, but it's just really neat to get to take the time to see what teams draft who and why. And of course, there's the teams that consistently draft really well. I mean, you think of a team like the Eagles, they're just constantly doing that well. Howie Roseman, absolute mastermind for whether it's moving up or down, like he just finds great value. Or, you also have those teams who you have the questions of why do they do what they do? And you start to see why bad organizations continue to be bad because there's this continual pressure to this has to be the thing that changes or I'm going to get fired. Not exactly a recipe for people making sound decisions that are good for the long run for their organizations. So with that in mind, today, whole plan I have for all of you is we're going to go through these different teams. We're going to go through the first round of the NFL draft as it currently sits, knowing that there will inevitably be at least a couple trades to shake things up. The way I've heard it's phrased is this year's probably going to be a lot more trades of jockeying for like position over a couple players, not just like this tier is so much higher. Like the middle tier, if you will, is a lot wider and longer and flatter of a tier from at least what I picked up these last couple of years of looking a little more into the draft. So I think even teams that have the ability to pick up a second pick within that range, even if it's a little bit later, if there's not that great of a difference, can really pay off to just have the opportunity to grab two guys instead of one and double the chance to hit. So yeah, with that in mind, I've selected three guys that I think are in play for all of these different teams, just to see kind of some of the different directions they could go. I've done a lot of different mocks, kind of just thinking through there's different ways you can approach mocks, right? Because there's the thought of, what do I think is going to happen? Like that predictive mock, which will be the final mock that I drop tomorrow, right before the draft. So be excited for that. And that's a fun way to do things. There's also the mocks of what are team tendencies? It's eventually as people draft and people are in charge of that, you start to see what people look for and get an idea of who they might pick. It can be small things or big things. Going with my Eagles example earlier, they love drafting in the trenches whenever possible and building there and gaining value that way. Or grabbing star defenders who are extremely athletic that fall slightly down the board. Those are a couple things that they like to tend to do when possible. The Packers are a team that's willing to invest in offensive line a smidge before others are, kind of in those middle rounds, and do so consistently, even if there's not a current need. And then you've got some of those other teams that just want to do what seems right to them and what's been working. Like, the Giants have had a couple good safeties here. They don't desperately need a safety, but man, I really think they could be in play for like a Caleb Downs, who's an absolute stud athlete and great guy coming out this year, just by far the top safety prospect by a long ways, if you're asking me, and just overall an elite blue chip talent. They like safeties. So I think there's a world where they draft him and that's just a very clear cut thing because that's their type of thing. So all this to say, let's go through. Got 3 picks for each team. Excited to hear what you guys think. Feel free to comment that for your team or other teams, just what you think is right, wrong, and different. I'm going to try and stick with these 3. Know that in some cases, teams could just go a lot of different directions. And also that nothing is guaranteed. I mean, a lot of what this is based on, too, is some teams I think multiple guys would be interested in. Problem being, you don't know if they're going to be there and you don't know when they're going to come off the board. Like, you have guesses, but there are some overlapping guys here. So if you're thinking to yourself like, man, how can all 3 of these teams draft this guy? Not what I'm going for. But if he's there, for example, I think the Titans would love David Bailey. Now, I don't think he makes it past 2 personally. If he does, I think the Titans would love him. So that being said, let's hop right into it. So first things first, starting off with the Las Vegas Raiders. This is probably the one exception to my overall concept of listing 3 players. There's no point to me listing two other players. So I listed the two most likely trades that they could get, because that number one slot this year, there's only one quarterback who is very noteworthy. There are a couple interesting prospects, but nothing that feels set in stone, nothing you want to hang your hat on. Fernando Mendoza, terrific season with Indiana last year. Honestly, to me, just feels like a mobile version of Jared Goff, which is a quarterback that I would love to have. Very accurate passer, great in the pocket, but also can break that pocket and make teams pay with his legs. And that's a valuable guy to have. And the NFL is a quarterback-driven league. So with that in mind, he should go number one. So even if the Raiders don't draft him, the next two most likely things for them are not other players. It's somebody else drafting him at number ones. My other option would be trading him to Arizona. Not him, but like the pick meaning, which effectively is Fernando. They're just in the 3 slot. They'd only have to drop a couple places. They could still pick up Hall. It delays them by a year in their process if you're the Raiders, though I don't think they do it. I think it's most likely. And then the Jets, of course, because the Jets actually have quite a few first-round picks to work with, and I think their thought is they're going to make the nest and be ready for a quarterback next year and get their pick with some of those multiple 2027 picks that they have. They just have the capital to move up, so therefore I think they're more likely. If they just are like, nope, we want to do this now, or for some reason there's, organizational staff there is feeling like they don't have a lot of leash, well, you could try and pull that trigger. To me, it's Fernando to the Raiders. I don't really think we can have much more of a conversation here without being pretty ridiculous. So, number 2 in the draft, we have Arvell Reese is my first option for the Jets. Jets need a little bit of everything. Their offensive line's pretty decent, actually, but outside of that, they really could use a lot. I'd say if I'm boiling it down, their 2 big needs are pass rusher and receiver, just 2 of those premium positions. You're picking this early. They do have a second first-round pick that's right in the middle of the first round, so can also snag a guy there. I just think those are the 2 things you need. To me, there's 3 pass rushers that are above everybody else by a million miles. View Arvell Reese as a pass rusher, that hybrid Micah Parsons-y type linebacker role. Also David Bailey, and also Ruben Bain Jr. out of Miami. So those 3 guys, all pass rushers. There's good receivers. There's a couple I really like. It just feels early, and you got to get that blue chip pass rusher if you can have them. So to me, they go with one of the pass rushers. I think those are their 3 most likely options. Once we get to the Cardinals at number 3, I think they're pretty open to trading this pick, all things considered. I mean, there's a lot of talent there that I'm sure they would love, but at the same time, you don't know what will or won't be there, and you don't know what somebody's willing to offer. I think David Bailey, once again, is on the table, assuming the Jets want Arvell Reese. If he is still there, I think you'd do that. Francis Mauigoa, the offensive tackle. Most people consider him the top offensive tackle within this class, which, all these things are a little bit subjective, of course, but, what can you do? You got to make a decision somewhere. And then Jeremiah Love, the stud running back. And I just think with all these options on the table, the Cardinals really, similar to what I said for the Jets, I think you're trying to build the nest, that you have a good spot for a quarterback to settle from this 2027 class. There's going to be a lot of quarterback talent that year. You're going to have more options. Of course, a lot can change in a year, but all the same, I really think it's picking up that key edge rusher or grabbing an offensive tackle are the things that make the most sense to me. Now, that being said, Jeremiah Love is a special talent, and giving, that new rookie quarterback a great backfield mate who's probably a top 6 running back right off the bat is appealing. I mean, I think it's very appealing. I think Love's great. He's awesome. He's head and shoulders above every other running back in this class, and it would be a huge part of a team. It just feels a little rich for some of these teams that have so many needs to go for a running back, which is, even when somebody who's elite, typically more of a thing you could secure at the end, not so much we're going to build around this guy, but it's also hard to ignore elite talent, so hard to say. Number 4, Sonny Styles, the combine star. I mean, just insane relative athletic score. I think he'd be a great fit for the Titans. He's got a lot of those kind of Fred Warner type of vibes that I think Robert Saleh would love. They could be a big David Bailey teams have come out, or reports have come out and said, excuse me. And then Carnell Tate, I think he's the top receiver in this class. Cam Ward could really use an elite prospect, and I just think the world of Carnell Tate. And that comes from a Michigan fan. The guy's good. I mean, he's got the size. He's got the traits. He produced alongside some other great receivers. I don't see how he can't at least be a consideration for the Titans. Number 5, we've got the Giants. Also, Sonny Styles feels like a good fit. Jeremiah Love I could see here. There's been some rumors. I'm a huge Cam Scatteraboo guy, but I also understand Jeremiah Love would be the better running back. I can understand that. It still feels like a poor move here. And Caleb Downs, I could really see them going with Malgoa, the offensive tackle I brought up before as well, but he didn't quite make my top 3 options for them. Of course, we'll see what happens. Really, the Giants, I feel like, are just trying to do whatever it takes to set Jackson Dart up to succeed. And then beyond that, grab a couple key defenders for some of those linchpin spots. Really, outside of pass rush, they're probably one of the few teams picking at all early, probably them of the Browns, who couldn't at least consider one of these pass rushers. I mean, they could, of course, they're great talents, but it's not a need. For the Browns in the 6 spots, I think it's definitely possible they trade out of this. We'll see if they're able to or not. But if they stick around, they really seem like they've been liking Spencer Fano as a potential offensive tackle. Francis Mauigoa, the other offensive tackle there that I was bringing up there for Miami. So a great pick. And Carnell Tate has been linked there a lot. And really, this is a team that needs offensive line. If you're going this early, you're going tackle, and wide receiver being the other position. So I think it'd be one of the tackles, or Carnell Tate is with certainty what the Browns are doing, assuming they stick in the 6th spot. Number 7, we have the Washington Commanders. My dream landing spot that I just desperately want so badly is for Carnell Tate to go to the Commanders. He's one of the 3 options I'm giving them here. He may be on the board. He may not be on the board. There may be other guys that they want to go. The rumors are that they'd actually like to grab an edge guy over anything else. And I could totally understand that, especially knowing that they have a defensive-minded head coach. All that to be said, Carnell Tate, catch and go balls alongside Terry McLaurin for Jaden Daniels. It just sounds like a beautiful situation. So I would love that. I also think the Commanders are in play for that number 3 edge rusher, Ruben Bain Jr., who for a while was viewed as number 2. Super strong, but a little bit of arm length concerns, a little bit of off the field character concerns that have been brought up. Could be overblown, could not be. It's hard to say. It's very early, of course. Is in play for them too, because he would be a real wrecker. Something that I've heard about lately is just the fact that, like, when you talk about what translates to the NFL, everyone gets faster in the NFL, and there's a lot of guys who put in a lot of hard work. There's guys who have technique. There's guys who watch film. But what seems to translate at edge is the strong guys tend to be the ones who are winning out. That's why even when you see people whiff on pass rushers, it's a lot of times because they're betting on that strength, because that tends to be the trait that shines through the most. And then finally, I think they could be in play for Sonny Styles. I think there's a chance that because he's a linebacker and the positional value is not as high, he could drop to them at number 7, and that wouldn't be a huge shock with that in mind. Though he's a great player, and I think it'd be a great pickup. In the number 8 spot, the Saints really aren't desperate across the board. Their big glaring need is receiver, and like a lot of teams, they could also use edge, maybe a corner. But I went Ruben Bain Jr. once again for them, and then Carnell Tate, you heard me talk about him, and Jordan Tyson. I could really see them going with him. I think they've already gotten used to living with a receiver with some of those injury concerns. So Tyson, on the ceiling side of things, has just a very elite ceiling. And I don't think it would be impossible at all to say, yep, Jordan Tyson's going to be the guy. He's going to be a guy that we just trust, even though we know, like, maybe he could have some lingering injury stuff pop up. Like, there's also a chance, like, freak stuff happens and you just have an insane talent who arguably could be the number 1 receiver in this class without those injuries. So I think those are the big things in play for the Saints. Number 9, surprisingly, from what we've seen previously, we have the Kansas City Chiefs picking here. The Chiefs having traded away one of their top 2 corners. I think released the other, if I have that right. Either way, they're down their top 2 corners from last year. They're good at developing corners, so I also think that there's a world where they wait and just choose to develop one of those guys and do what they know and do what has worked well. But also, they're picking this early. Mansour Delane is, to me, like the clear number 1. Just a world of talents, everything you really want out of that early and elite cornerback 1 who can just put people on an island. I'd love to see them go him. But if not, I think they could also just tackle a couple of those needs in terms of build an offensive line that is going to protect Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that's a work in progress. If Francis Mauigoa slips to here, I like him. I like Ruben Bain Jr. as well. He could definitely fall there, and that would be a huge win for the Chiefs to be able to have some good pass rush outside of, George Karlaftis, who they've drafted, which is great, and Chris Jones is very talented, but those guys could easily use some help. And I think in today's modern NFL too, you just have to be able to rush the passer, and this would give them a big leg up in that endeavor. At 10, the Giants are back on the board, so obviously a lot of this pick may be shaped by who they took earlier. I like them to grab one of the offensive tackles, Mauigoa or Fano if they're there. And then Caleb Downs, who I mentioned earlier for them at 5. I think he's in play at 5. I think if he makes it to 10, just knowing the way that they've loved grabbing safeties previously with that GM, and then Harbaugh loves just getting safeties and the talent that those can bring, and the way that, honestly, the modern NFL is moving more towards kind of those hybrid safety linebacker type guys, those elite players. Like, I just think Caleb Downs is a no-brainer to fit that defense, really just be the signal caller on that defense for a long while and be able to do that really, really well. When it comes to the Miami Dolphins, they are essentially giving up this year for all intents and purposes. They have 2 first-round picks, and we will see how that goes for them. They need everything, as I said. Glaring needs being the defensive backfield and receiver. I could really go on, but that's boiling it down to what I would put at the tops. I think Mansour Delane, once again, if he has not gone, very much in play for these Dolphins. Hard guy to pass up, knowing his talents. I think Mekhi Lemon is on the table for them. A talented receiver out of USC. A little bit shorter, but also just a guy that you can throw the ball to a lot, and he will just keep making those catches over the middle, up the sideline, plays a little bit bigger than he is just a talented wide receiver through and through, frankly. And then finally, I would say Jermod McCoy, who is my number 2 cornerback in this class out of Tennessee. Solid player, not a bad guy at all to have. I think that secondary is, again, huge for them. And especially knowing Jeff Hafley, the way that he's been able to use that secondary, particularly the safety position, but also, I just don't think the value's here at safety yet. Maybe they trade down with that in mind if they truly want that, but I don't really see it. Just to get leapfrogged by somebody else for one of the top couple of guys, I think they'd stick with one of those 2 or the receiver. Jordan Tyson, also a great fit there. I just don't know if he lasts, because it sounds like the NFL values Carnell Tate, Jordan Tyson, wide gap between them and anybody else. The Rams, down to 1 first-round pick now after trading their other one to actually acquire Kansas City's former cornerback. I think they're the ideal landing spot for Mekhi Lemon. He just feels like a Sean McVay guy. I think just gobbling up those catches. I think being able to say, Puka's injured a fair amount. Devontae's older and gets injured more often now. I think just being able to have a solid third receiver that when you're clearly in a Super Bowl push, Matthew Stafford's only getting older. You don't really have a succession plan currently at quarterback. You got to push those chips in. And part of, I think, doing that is shoring up those things that you're not leaving yourself open and available to. We had 2 guys get injured. Now our season's tanked. He would give them the freedom to, Puka's hurt. He could use the game off because that would really help him heal for the long term. Do it. It's not a risk. We still have a guy in here who's going to catch a lot of balls and do this well. Outside of that, I could really see them going Monroe Freeling, the tackle. I could see them trying to just say, Stafford's here. We need to protect him. As long as he's here, we're going to need to protect him badly. It's only going to get more apparent. So I like that move. And finally, Ty Simpson. It's too early to take him, but I did want to mention him in the Rams conversation just because I think he's a guy who could do great in this system. I just don't think the Rams are at a spot where they can sacrifice draft capital like this, or even honestly, probably their second, saying a guy like Ty Simpson, because it's, to me, too big of a risk. I mean, from what I've seen, it seems like they like him. I just don't know how you do that. It feels like a not all-in move, and the Rams are a very all-in team, both in what they're currently doing and how they've acted. So I think that's a key part there. Up next, the Baltimore Ravens at 14 is huge. Picking a little sooner than the Ravens typically do. They're normally a lot later. And I think on the table for them, they could use Kenyon Sadiq. Mark Andrews is only getting older. I don't hate that move at all. Highly athletic tight end out of Oregon. Combine numbers through the roof. Jermod McCoy's in play as well, if you ask me, just because they could always use an additional secondary piece, and it's never a bad thing to have in today's day and age in the modern NFL. And then Vega Ione, I'm doing my very best, the interior offensive lineman who's far and above ranked the highest one of the interior offensive linemen, typically a position that gets pushed down the board a bit because of positional value. I think is probably the most likely person for them to take should he be there. They just could use shoring up that inside of the line, and you got to keep Lamar clean. I mean, Lamar's good at being slippery and getting away from stuff, but don't make him work too hard for it. He's only getting older. At 15, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Glaring need, edge rusher. I think the 2 that they're deciding between, all the big names are going to be off the board, barring them moving up, and I kind of actually like that for them. I could see a world where they move up for sure, but assuming that doesn't happen, they're sticking and picking at 15. They would go Keldrick Falk, who is kind of a toolsy guy, but a little more raw, but long-term has this high ceiling. Or Akeem Mesidor, who played for Miami last year, produced really well alongside Ruben Bain. Only issue being he's an older prospect. He's 25 years old already. So by the time you get through that rookie deal, you're looking at a 30-year-old guy potentially, which is hard. Not that you have to get that second contract, but when you're using picks this high, it's nice to get that little extra value. So I do see that as a challenge for the Buccaneers in drafting him. All the same, though, the Buccaneers effectively have everything they need on offense. They have the receivers, they have the offensive line, they have a solid quarterback, they have a good run game. Their defense is largely together. They really just need some more pass rushers to get home. So I think it might be worth it to just say, like, yeah, he's older, but he's also going to start right now and be able to do this right away. We're not going to spend a couple years developing like we would with Falk. And if neither of those things happen, one of my ideal things that I could see going on here is the Buccaneers picking up Kenyon Sadiq, that athletic tight end. I think if you're going to add a tool on offense, Cade Otton, not an awful tight end, but Kenyon Sadiq, far and away a huge upgrade. Continues to give tools to Baker Mayfield, comes alongside and something they don't have because it's not just another receiver, because he can play in line and block effectively too. I really like that landing spot. I don't know if it's the most likely, but I like it a lot. When we arrive at the Jets at 16, I really don't see a world where they're not looking for a receiver. If Jordan Tyson somehow slipped down the board because teams are actually more worried about his injuries, I think he's a no-brainer here for the Jets at this point, just because the value is very high. It's a huge win if you get him there. I could see Casey Concepcion, talented receiver, good hands, good routes, self-confident. I like what he brings to the table. He's just a bit smaller, and I think he's more of a slot guy that could work along with Garrett Wilson. I don't feel like at 16 you're doing that. I actually think the most likely option is the last receiver. I listed 3 receivers, as I said. Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana. I just think he brings a very complete package. I think he can be used in a few different ways. So even if you're in the draft next year or later in this draft, you can really draft whatever piece to put alongside him. And you're not like, oh no, well, we have our X. Oh no, we have our Z. Oh no, we have our slot guy. Who cares? Just, he's going to be there. He's going to be great. Use him where you can need him. It's that simple. As far as the Detroit Lions go, it's 17. They are looking at probably an offensive tackle or a defensive end. I would have to say they could use a little bit of pass rush. Just try and get that going there a little bit. I don't think Dan Campbell would be sad about that particularly. Just seeing those guys get after the passer a little bit better. Aiden Hutchinson's good, but he could use help. It's hard. You're the only guy, truly. I think Kendrick Falk could be really good because I think they'd be willing to take the time to bring him along, and he could be a good talent to have there with that team. I like Caden Proctor. Sorry, Cade McDonald. We'll cover in a minute. The tackle at Alabama, absolutely huge. Just frankly needs to get himself in a little bit better shape, and I think he'd be even more in play. And then, Monroe Freeling, I'll tackle once again, just good abilities, solid tackle prospect. I like it for the Lions. I think it'd be good. Behind the Lions, picking at 18, another NFC North team, the Vikings. The Vikings, really, defense is the need. They're figuring out themselves in quarterback. That's fine. We're just going to let that be for now. If somehow he makes it here, would love Kenyon Sadiq to this team. I didn't put him because I don't think he makes it this far. Honestly, he might even go sooner than I'm expecting, but I just don't think he makes it this far. So I'm going to go with Dylan Thieneman, top safety prospect, Avian Terrell, solid corner prospect, and Caden McDonald, who I view as the top defensive tackle this year. Not a strong year for defensive tackles. There's some guys, certainly not the strength of this class. So with those things in mind, I think those would best serve what the Vikings need to do and give them a few more tools. All that being said, I couldn't resist the Panthers at 19. Kenyon Sadiq is my top choice for them, and this would be a great landing spot because further moves to just give Bryce Young no excuses. Talented tight end, good receiver core, good backfield, good offensive coaching, a defense that can support you. You have the offensive line that's blocking well. Are you the guy or not? I know what I just said about him probably not being there. If he's there, this is where the slide stops. He doesn't get past the Panthers at 19 in any situation. I just can't see it whatsoever. Should he not be there, though, I like Casey Concepcion. I think adding a more talented slot, Jalen Coker, is a nice piece, but I think Casey Concepcion is better. To pair along with Tenero McMillan, which would be great. And then I could see Keldrick Falk as my third choice. Never bad to add pass rush, frankly, and they're a younger team who could afford to bring him along. For the Cowboys at this point in the draft, I think they could double up or add a cornerback here in this spot as well, just knowing how awful their secondary was. Avian Terrell's in play, and Colton Hood's in play. I'm hearing his name for the first time. I also could see them going with, depending where negotiations are, with George Pickens, Denzel Boston here. Now, Boston's a guy I think analysts like a bit more than the NFL does because it seems like a lot of NFL executives I haven't exactly heard talk about him. I mean, it's hard to miss him. He's a 6'4" receiver with good speed who's athletic. They're not going to miss him, but at the same time, I don't know if he has the buzz. So I'm wondering if he's a guy who's just being pushed up more by what the media is saying and what people want, especially in the fantasy football world. I want a talented, huge 6'4" receiver. Like, that sounds great. I would love that. I just don't know if it's happening, but if he does go, great spot for the Cowboys. The Pittsburgh Steelers, a couple things that they like to do, and that is have great defense and draft first-round wide receivers. So I put Mekhi Lemon in play. I think he goes way sooner to the Rams, as I previously stated. This is similar to what I said about Sadiq. This is his floor. He does not make it past the Steelers. They would like his talent too much to not draft him. I don't think they can help themselves. There is some newness to this regime a little bit with Mike McCarthy in place, but I think he would see a role for Lemon as his ideal slot guy, kind of a la Randall Cobb from back in the day, and I don't think he would be too opposed. If not for that, I think getting a jump on the offensive tackle search they'll probably be doing next year with Blake Miller's in play. And then Chris Johnson, the cornerback, I think would be good for them too. They have a very long history of having a great defense in Pittsburgh, of course, and I think Chris Johnson would fit really well in with that. For the Chargers, I think they need to go interior offensive line or edge rusher. And at this point in the draft, I just don't see a lot of value with the edge rushers. You can reach on a guy. I'll have some for other teams coming up and not even that long. I just don't see Jim Harbaugh as a guy to reach. So with that in mind, I've got 3 guards here. I've got Chase Besantis, who I loved watching him at the combine. He just outworked other guys. And that says a lot to me because when you're in a group of guys who are all here trying to show their stuff, trying to prove what they've got, it doesn't even look like you're bigger, stronger, faster. It does look to me like you're giving 100% of your talent, though, and you're big, strong, fast, athletic, all those things. So I love Chase Besantis. We've got Vega Ione, once again, too. I mean, the top interior line prospect, if he makes it here, I would put just about any money that he's getting drafted by the Chargers. And then Emmanuel Pregnant out of Oregon, very pro-ready guard. So if you're just looking for a guy who can hop in and start playing, I think he's a great choice. Following the Chargers, we have the Eagles, who inevitably, if somebody falls, will scoop up value, such as Dylan Thieneman, that top safety I brought up before. If they truly are looking at trading A.J. Brown, I think Denzel Boston is also a guy who could land here purely because he's another big-bodied receiver who could not be A.J. Brown for sure. A.J. Brown's a good player, but if he gives you 75% A.J. Brown, you're pretty happy you took him here. So I think he's in play for them. And then also just trying to get ahead of Lane Johnson's retirement coming up here. I think Caleb Lomu could be on the table for them. Traditional left tackle out of Utah. I think he's a very talented player. I like his tape from what I've gotten to see, and I could see the Eagles falling in love and just saying, cool, offensive line continues to be a strength. We're back at the point where the Browns are on the table, and I really think that they're looking at needing a receiver here, especially if they go offensive line earlier, like I'm picturing. And if they go receiver earlier, they're probably going offensive line here. So with that in mind, Denzel Boston, come on back down. Blake Miller, the offensive tackle, seems like a them type of guy. And there also is a world where they go interior offensive line. So like maybe like Keelan Rutledge. They could also trade out of this pick. It's not a guarantee for sure and just snag a couple others. Hard to say. It's really going to largely depend on their first pick, I would say. At 25, the Bears are looking at needing a defensive tackle, maybe an edge rusher, kind of their primary things. I think they could go Blake Miller, the offensive tackle, too, and just shore that up a bit, get some depth. TJ Parker's in play because he's a productive pass rusher now, and if the Bears are already jumping up to competing in a way that maybe some didn't expect, I don't know if they want to wait to bring a pass rusher along with them. So I think TJ Parker, Clemson being maybe a more pro-ready guy who's probably going to get you some sacks right now. Maybe you're losing a tiny bit of ceiling, but you're also not losing time. I think it's valuable to them. Most likely, though, for them, in my eyes, is Caden McDonald, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. I just think he's really good. I think he has a great ability to stuff the run, and I think he's got pass rush upside, which for all the defensive tackles this year is probably about the best you could say. None of them are truly getting after. The quarterback, I think he's got the chance to add that skill set, especially because he was making tackles and being productive in a defense where, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese, all those guys who we're talking about in the top 5 to 10 were playing with him. So that's impactful for a defensive tackle all the same. And I think he really could have those skills. He just hasn't gotten to show them. For the Bills, they're a sucker for a good safety. So Emmanuel McNeill-Warren out of Toledo, smaller school, great season last year. I definitely see them potentially loving him. They could desperately use a pass rush. I think TJ Parker's in play here. And then also, they might want to re-roll the dice on their Keon Coleman play. Denzel Boston, also a really fun fit with the Bills. People were loving that, especially before the DJ Moore trade. I still think it's possible. DJ Moore is not a spring chicken, and more receivers is not a bad thing whatsoever. So will they do that? I don't know, but I like it. It's a fun fit. 27, the 49ers. I think they don't seem to view offensive tackle as a big need, but if the talent's there, I still think they could go with like a Max Ahia, the offensive tackle out of Arizona State. A little bit newer to football, very talented. I could see them working with him and bringing him along well. They seem like a great KC Concepcion team, again, coming out of the slots, being a guy who is where he's supposed to be when he's supposed to be, very important to Kyle Shanahan. And also, grabbing a safety, that Emmanuel McNeill-Warren, once again, I think they could do that. They could use the depth and the talent both. So I don't think it's a bad move. When it comes to the Texans, their interior offensive line is so trash and it needs help so desperately. Chase Bisontis, lovely pick here. Something I've noticed is that there are a lot of teams that actually need interior offensive line, but it's typically not a position that's as highly valued. So when I see that, I think you're going to get a couple of these guys who are pushed up the board. Chase Bisontis is probably realistically more of like an early to mid second round player. Same with like an Emmanuel Pregnon. Somebody's going to get pushed up here. There's too many teams that need interior offensive line that none of them go a little bit earlier than they probably should. And also with that being said, I really think that first half of the second round, you're going to see quite a few of those guards come off the table. That would not be a surprise to me at all. Possibly even the center, Jack Slaughter out of Florida, that would not be a surprise to me at all either. But anyways, with that, Chase Bisontis, as I said, Emmanuel Pregnon, those two guys, great, good guards. It's really needed. Texans really need to protect Stroud. It's massive for their success. And if they don't do that and want to lean defense, I think Caden McDonald's a dream fit here. You're really ignoring your offensive problem, but hey, it's a fun thought for me to think of him going there. When it comes to the Chiefs, I think they could go Max Ahia, the offensive tackle. Peter Woods, offensive tackle, is first time getting brought up. They could really use, an heir apparent and somebody to help out. Chris Jones. Then Avian Terrell also just staying in that corner if they haven't already. This is a great spot to snag value on him or a few other guys. Kind of a pick your flavor of corner at this point, but there's a lot of them who are well within this range. Similar to what I said about guards, probably a couple go and, the 22 to, mid-second range, kind of from like 2/3 through that first half of the second. Like corners will probably come off the board a decent amount from what it looks like. Hard to say with certainty. But anyways, along with that too, though, I don't know. I just see the Chiefs as having a few different needs. They're also definitely a team that could trade out here and pick up value, and that wouldn't shock me either. For the Dolphins, again, they need a receiver, Denzel Boston. Great fit if he's somehow there. Caleb Banks, defensive tackle of Florida, I could see working for them because they kind of need everything, and building those lines would be huge, and I think he'd go a long ways. And then D'Angelo Pons, extremely talented but undersized. I think there's a world where he drops a ton because of size. I think there's a where he gets drafted, honestly, quite a bit sooner than this because teams just say, like, who cares? He can ball. So he's going to be a real mystery and big question to see where he goes. For the Patriots, drafting at 31 following them, Denzel Boston's a dream. I don't think he's there, but if he's there, I love the pick. If they don't go receiver here, I will say I think it's a big tell that the A.J. Brown trade is even more likely. So with that in mind, I lean into them grabbing a pass rusher. I think T.J. Parker, if he hasn't gone already, and I think Cassius Howell's another good guy too, who could potentially land their way. And then finally at 32, before we get to the other teams who don't have a first-round pick, it's the Seattle Seahawks, and this is probably the most likely to be traded first-round pick out of all of them. Seattle's not afraid of trading down. And another team very well might want to come up to get their guy, especially to get that fifth-year option. That is the huge blessing of a first-round pick. So I would watch out for Arizona trading down or back in to snag, what's his face? Snag Ty Simpson, the quarterback out of Alabama. That is my pretty chalky pick for these guys. If not, I think you're going defensive back, probably like a Brandon Cece or Chris Johnson. Staying at a corner, bolster that room. They have a few different needs, honestly, more than you'd expect for a Super Bowl winning team, but I think that would go a long ways to patching that up. From here on out, it is all teams who don't have a first round pick, but they do have a pick in this draft, of course, a couple of them. These are just the guys I expect to be there. Know that at this point it gets less predictable because, one, I'm not as good as the prospects once we get further out. I'm into this. I've been getting more into it. I'm certainly not a literal full-on expert of deep diving into this stuff. It's my best guess based on what I know and what the team needs are, which I feel like I can identify pretty well. So we'll run through those things. All these are second-round picks that we have going on here. So the next team to pick, who has not picked yet, is the Bengals at 41. I think they could go linebacker CJ Allen, the pass rusher Zion Young, or the defensive tackle Christian Miller. Really, anything on defense. Having just picked up Dexter Lawrence in exchange for their 10th overall pick, I don't think Christian Miller's as in play, but at the same time, they're a bad team, and if you want to say, like, we're just going to make a strength and put you next to Dexter, there's a world where that makes sense, the same way that staying at linebackers that they're less abrasively terrible, or getting a guy who can get rid of who can rush the passer in Zion Young is also not a bad move. At 47, we have the Colts. I think Malachi Lawrence, the edge rushers on the table, Caleb Tiernan, the offensive tackles in play, got to keep their quarterbacks upright. And then Lee Hunter, the defensive tackle, I think is also in play for this team. A lot of potential if they can put it together. I just don't know where they're at quarterback-wise because I think just waiting on Daniel Jones' injury is an odd but interesting one considering they've kind of made some of the win-now moves, but they don't have the quarterback. They're in a weird spot, and I think even they would probably admit that. So we'll be seeing how that goes. 48, immediately following them is the Falcons. Lee Hunter once again. Josiah Trotter, the linebacker, and Brandon Cece, the cornerback. Good options. We'll see what happens. I think the Falcons need defense per normal. That's kind of just their thing. Their offense isn't so bad, but their defense could use a little TLC usually. The Green Bay Packers, 52. I like Traden Stukes, athletic corner. Good guy for them to have. Flexible. Love the talent. Christian Miller, the defensive tackle, would be a solid move, especially for a team that really could stand to beef up that defensive line. And then I like Jennings Dunker. He's a very Packersy type. He can play tackle. He can play guard. He's strong as an ox. He's fun to watch, honestly. Bulldoze over guys. He's a hoot, so I'd love seeing him as a Packer. And I think he's a Packers type too, which is fun. At 56 for the Jaguars, we've got Dominic Orange, nicknamed Big Citrus, which is amazing. The tackle in Iowa. And I think they could just use a clogger in the middle, and he'd be great for that. You could also see Malachi Lawrence go there, the pass rusher, get a little help there, especially if they're going to be in some of these shootouts, competing with some of these teams down the stretch in the playoffs, which is where the Jags hoped to be after their success last year. You're gonna need guys to get the quarterback. Finally, kind of a fun one here that I have actually for both of these last two teams here. With Denver to follow these guys. Eli Stowers, the tight end out of Vanderbilt. I think he would be a lot of fun as a Jag. And with Trevor Lawrence like in the slot and some of those guys as opposed to the out wide receivers, I really think Stowers could do well there. And finally, the Denver Broncos, who I think Jacob Rodriguez, the linebacker, could be a good fit if you want to just solidify that defense. They've clearly gone win now mode considering they traded away their first round pick for Jalen Waddle, which I think is a good move, but also commits them. Max Clare, the tight end out of Ohio State. And once again, Eli Stowers, the tight end out of Vanderbilt, are my next two picks for them. I think Sean Payton really wants his Joker type player. I don't know that he has that on the roster right now, and both those guys I think could make that happen. So those are the guys I think are most likely to be there, the guys who I think might be available. It's tough to say, right? Because one team drafts one guy early or one guy starts to fall, all bets are off. It's fun. I encourage you, if you haven't tried it before, like do an NFL mock draft, and even some of the fun with getting into the draft too isn't even just like seeing if you're right or wrong. It's fun to have guys to root for. Like, for your team, you're not going to watch them play football till September. But what is fun to watch your team do is say, like, I have these couple guys I love from the draft, kind of your draft darlings, if you will, and being able to pull for those guys and being able to, one, hope that your team drafts them because they're the guy you've just been pulling for and wanting so badly. But on the flip side of that too, there's also this point of like, even if they go to another team, like, you now know a lot more about their film, more about like what they were doing previously. You've got a guy you can kind of root for on Sunday, even if your team's not playing yet. And that's a fun thing to be able to do because ultimately only we're doing this fantasy football thing and having fun with that. It's fun making those connections. Those connections make it really fun. It's fun going back and forth with your buddy over how you got absolutely burned by Kyle Pitts and you're never doing it again. And the next year, he's right back at the Kyle Pitts well. When you've got your friend who said like, oh, Cam Scadoo is going to be a nothing. Absolutely. A nothing burger, I think is Sam, friend of the podcast, had said at one point to me. Well, I think Scadoo looked great last year right up until that ankle injury. He was an absolute treat to watch and super fun. And it's just fun because it gets more involved because ultimately football is fun and it's a business for these guys. It's also a very relational game where it's real people, it's not just who's got the best stats. It's not a Madden thing. It's what are these guys going to do with the talent that they've been given in the place that they've been put. And that's a fun thing to get to see and check out, and seeing that all filter through in the NFL draft is an absolute blast. Yeah, if you haven't given it a lot of try before or really bought in, it's pretty fun. Even if it's just for the first round, it's fun seeing all the hype. Last year, having gotten the chance to attend the draft in Green Bay all 3 days, it was a amazing and incredible experience. And not just because I am a Packer fan, although that was a nice touch seeing it right there. It was incredible to just be there and see all that was happening and the hype and the intensity and all the intentionality. Um, and honestly, even just letting my homer bias show a little bit, watching Matthew Golden get drafted and the reaction that people had, watching like old men weep and people jump around and get beyond excited, the lights go off, like him coming out in that gold suit and just celebrating, going right all the way down that kind of catwalk style thing and into the midst of this crowd of hundreds of thousands screaming and cheering and just so excited. I mean, it was a really cool moment. It was so much more than just like picking teams at recess. It's pretty special. It's pretty intentional. With that in mind, maybe give checking out the NFL draft a little bit of a try. I think it can be a really good time. I'm hoping next year that I can get a little bit more into that for you guys and give you a little bit more insight on how to do that, how to get excited, some of those fun things to look for. And of course, we're going to be covering the fantasy impact of it all. So thank you guys so much for listening to me talk today. A little bit longer episode, but lots of guys to cover, a lot of fun. Tomorrow's episode will be pretty short, pretty sweet, just kind of like clip right through those picks of my final mock, and we'll see what you guys think then. So for now, thanks for being a part of our team here at the Chump Change Fantasy Football Podcast. I appreciate you guys. Hope you're doing well, and we'll see you later.